Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the greatest recordings ever! Yes, by popular demand, the ultimate, objective, without dispute, unquestionably accurate list of the greatest recordings of everything ever. I have no idea how many videos there are going to be in this series, as I pointed out. And as I also pointed out, we are going to be covering all of the repertoire, including the greatest recordings ever of things you might not have heard of because they are the greatest recordings ever. I am not limiting this to just basic repertoire or artists you may know by heart and worship in private at your private shrine, and none of that. We are going to just focus on the greatest recordings ever by interpretation and technical excellence and sonic excellence where applicable, and it's going to be amazing. Absolutely amazing. Now, because we're talking about recordings, I will say this. Sonics do matter, and for this first recording, it's a particularly interesting exception to the general rule. I wouldn't call it an exception. My definition of sonic excellence is a recording which never gets in the way of the performance. That is, the engineering, the sonic framework, what the engineers do, don't prevent you from hearing all of the wonderfulness of the actual performance itself. So that means that things can be in mono, they can be historical on occasion, but in general, the engineering is going to be extremely important because there are some recordings where the engineering really does make the performance. I mean, it really does give you the experience that creates that overwhelming fabulousness that qualifies the recording for this elite category. So we're beginning with the Shostakovich Symphony number 10 with the Czech Philharmonic conducted by Karel Ančerl on Deutsche Grammophon, and here it is. There it is. Now, why is this one of the greatest recordings ever? Well, first of all, it was recorded, let's see here now, in 1956. So 1956, that means that at the time that it was recorded, the symphony had only been out there for about 3 years. It was brand new. Now, there are many recordings of the Shostakovich 10th led by the Leningrad Philharmonic under Yevgeny Mravinsky, who was Shostakovich's own favorite conductor and who conducted Shostakovich with extraordinary authority and conviction selectively. However, and here is the thing that really gets you, this is better. This is better than anything Mravinsky did, quite frankly. First of all, because it is sonically superior. Even though it's a mono recording, it's a superb mono recording. It's natural. It has plenty of dynamic range. You hear everything that you need to hear. The orchestra is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And what's really kind of interesting is that the Czech Philharmonic, first of all, they were every bit as good in orchestra, as great in orchestra as the Leningrad Phil, especially when Ančerl was leading them. Ančerl was a specialist in contemporary music. He conducted with extraordinary accuracy and rhythmic verve, particularly Stravinsky and other modern composers. His Prokofiev and his Shostakovich were superb, uniformly superb. And beyond that, what makes this so interesting is that I don't know if you read the article in the Village Voice about the time that the Berlin Wall came down, but there was an amazing article on the Czech Philharmonic under Václav Neumann at that time called The Orchestra That, something like The Orchestra That Toppled Communism. It's an amazing article on the role that the Czech Philharmonic played in the cultural life of then Czechoslovakia and what they did to challenge and ultimately defeat the communist regime in Czechoslovakia. And one of the things that they talked about was the Czech tour of the Soviet Union. One of the things that happened, and you can see this actually now, unfortunately, in a more brutal way, in the way Russia's behaving in Ukraine, is that Russia behaved very, very patronizingly towards its satellite countries in the Eastern Bloc. And when the Moscow Philharmonic or the Russian orchestras, Leningrad, came whipping into these, other the capitals of the, what you might call the occupied Eastern Bloc, the Iron Curtain countries, they were obnoxious. And they had a lot of attitude as they, everything Russian was culturally superior, et cetera, et cetera. And the Eastern Bloc countries really resented this. Their artists resented it. And nowhere were they resented more than by the Czech Philharmonic, because Czechoslovakia, even at that point in the 50s and early 60s, was sort of itching for at least a certain level of independence, although the government was wholly beholden to the Soviet government. But in any case, there was competition there. There was. And so there is no way that the Czech Philharmonic was not fully aware of the fact that in playing Shostakovich's 10th Symphony, which was Shostakovich, the greatest composer alive in Russia at the time, and this is right after Stalin had died, in 1953, that they were competing with the Russians in the same repertoire. And it just seems when they made this recording, they said, we're going to show those sons of bitches how this is really done. And not only do they play the daylights out of the symphony, it's just an extraordinary performance, but the tragic subtext of this music seems to have been totally familiar to everyone in the Eastern Bloc. I mean, the fact that Shostakovich was a persecuted genius and that his music was somehow a chronicle of the suffering of the artist and by extension the people generally under the Soviet regime, that seemed to not be a secret to these people, because this is such an intense and powerful statement. It's really an extraordinary recording, absolutely extraordinary. It has held its own as one of the greatest recordings of anything, certainly one of the greatest recordings of the Shostakovich discography since the day it was released, and it remains so to this very moment. So we begin our survey of the greatest recordings ever with the Karel Ančerl Shostakovich 10th. And remember also that Ančerl himself, as a Holocaust survivor and a Jew who was being persecuted in Czechoslovakia, he really got it. He just got it. And this performance just sends chills down your spine. If you haven't heard it, then you really need to. And even though it's mono, you have to have a little bit of indulgence for the sonics, but not a lot. It's beyond vivid and powerful. So there you have it. Number one. Not the best, number one the best, but number one in the series. Many other great recordings are coming. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me in this new adventure. Keep on listening and take care.